Bikers mock a female veteran until her military K9s step in and leave them speechless. The summer heat shimmered off the pavement, creating waves of distortion that made the motorcycles gleam and dance in the light. Rita Lawson stood quietly at the edge of the park, taking in the familiar sights and sounds that brought her back to younger days. The rumble of engines vibrated through her chest, a feeling that had once been as natural as breathing. Max, her German shepherd, stood alert at her left side, his ears perked forward as he scanned the growing crowd. Charlie, more relaxed but equally vigilant, waited patiently on her right. Both dogs wore their service vests, the material catching the sunlight as they moved. "Just like old times, boys," Rita murmured, reaching down to pat Max's head. The corner of her mouth lifted in a small smile as she remembered the countless rallies she'd attended in her youth, back when the leather of her jacket was still stiff and new. The park had transformed into a sea of chrome and leather. Bikes of every make and model lined the pathways, their owners gathered in clusters, sharing stories and comparing rides. Children pointed excitedly at the impressive machines, while parents snapped photos. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal and grass. Rita adjusted her light jacket, more out of habit than necessity. She hadn't come to show off or make a statement. These days were long past. She just wanted to feel that old spark again, to remember what it was like to be part of this world. Max pressed closer to her leg, sensing her nostalgia. As they made their way through the entrance, Rita noticed how some of the older bikers nodded respectfully at her dog's service vests. A few even smiled, recognizing the military patches. Charlie's tail wagged gently at the attention, though he maintained his professional composure. The rally was bigger than she'd expected. Vendors had set up stalls selling everything from leather goods to hot dogs. Music drifted from somewhere near the center of the gathering, classic rock competing with the constant rumble of engines. Rita paused to admire a restored vintage Harley, its chrome work catching the sun like liquid silver. "Beautiful machine," she said softly to herself, remembering the bike she'd owned decades ago. Max and Charlie stood perfectly still beside her, their training evident in every controlled movement. As they ventured deeper into the crowd, the atmosphere shifted. A group of younger bikers lounged near their motorcycles, their leather vests adorned with patches Rita didn't recognize. Their laughter carried across the space, loud and sharp against the background noise. One of them noticed her first, nudging his companions and pointing. Rita felt their eyes on her, taking in her age, her simple clothes, and especially her dog's. The laughter grew louder, more pointed. She could feel Max tensing beside her, picking up on the shift in energy. "Hey, look what we got here!" one of them called out, pushing away from his bike. His friends straightened up, their grins widening as they focused on Rita and her companions. The mocking tone in their voices was unmistakable, cutting through the pleasant atmosphere like a harsh note in a melody. Charlie's ears flicked back slightly, though he remained steady. Max's posture became more rigid, his training warring with his protective instincts. Rita kept her face neutral, though her fingers tightened slightly on the leashes. She'd faced worse in her time, but the sting of their derision was still there, sharp and unexpected in the warm afternoon air. Rita's boots scuffed against the hot pavement as she slowed her steps, the weight of several pairs of eyes pressed against her back, followed by snickers and whispers that grew louder with each passing second. Max and Charlie walked perfectly in step beside her, their training evident in every controlled movement. "Well, would you look at that?" A gruff voice called out. "Somebody's grandma brought her puppies to our rally." More laughter erupted from the group of bikers. Rita kept her eyes forward, her weathered hands steady on the leashes. She'd faced worse than this in her years of service. Much worse. The dogs sensed her tension but remained calm, exactly as they were trained to do. A tall figure broke away from the group, his heavy boots thundering against the pavement as he approached. His leather vest creaked as he moved, patches and pins catching the sunlight. This was Joe, She'd heard others call out to him earlier, their voices full of deference and a touch of fear. "Hey there, ma'am," Joe drawled, drawing out the word ma'am like it was some kind of joke. He circled around to face her, forcing Rita to stop in her tracks. "Those are some interesting dogs you got there. What were they for? Helping you cross the street?" Rita stood straight, her spine rigid from years of military bearing. She watched as Joe's eyes flickered over her dogs, taking in their disciplined stance and alert expressions. Max's ears twitched forward, but he remained perfectly still. "Military dogs?" Joe scoffed, addressing his audience more than Rita. "Come on. You expect us to believe that? What'd you do in the military? Cook meals?" His friends howled with laughter, the sound echoing across the rally grounds. The heat from the pavement seemed to rise up around them, making the air shimmer. Rita felt sweat trickle down her back, but she didn't move a muscle. She'd stood at attention under worse conditions, in places these men couldn't imagine. "I bet those dogs don't even know what a real threat looks like," another biker called out. "Probably just for show." Joe leaned in closer, his breath smelling of cigarettes and coffee. "What's wrong, lady? Cat got your tongue?" He grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "Or maybe you're just realizing you don't belong here?" The other bikers had formed a loose circle now, their leather vests creaking as they moved closer. Charlie remained steady at Rita's left side, while Max stood alert on her right. Both dogs' eyes tracked every movement, but they held their positions perfectly. "Bet they're just oversized lapdogs," someone shouted from the back of the group. "Probably can't even handle a real fight." "What? Are you going to send your dog after me?" One of the bikers laughed louder than the rest, his voice cutting through the humid air. Rita turned, slowly, deliberately, to face the group. Her movements were precise, controlled, just like every other aspect of her life. She'd spent decades perfecting this kind of composure, first in the military and then in civilian life. The mockery stung, but she'd learned long ago that pain was just another tool for building strength. The dogs moved with her, their synchronized movement causing a few of the bikers to take an instinctive step back, though they quickly covered it with more nervous laughter. Rita took a measured breath and squared her shoulders. The midday sun cast long shadows across the park as she turned to face her challengers. Max and Charlie, sensing the shift in their handler's energy, moved in perfect synchronization to flank her sides. Their postures changed from relaxed to alert, yet they maintained their calm demeanor. "Heel," Rita commanded softly. Both dogs responded instantly, positioning themselves precisely at her sides. Their movements were fluid, practiced, a dance they'd performed countless times before. The crowd of bikers fell silent, watching as these two dogs transformed from what they'd dismissed as simple pets into something altogether different. Their militant precision was unmistakable, and even some of the more vocal mockers shifted uncomfortably. Joe crossed his arms over his leather vest, trying to maintain his bravado. "Well, well, they can follow basic commands." "How impressive," he drawled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. His eyes darted between Max and Charlie, noting their alertness and disciplined stance. "You want to see what they can really do?" Rita's voice carried clearly across the space between them, steady and confident. She didn't raise her voice or show any sign of the anger that had built up inside her. Joe's gaze drifted to the obstacle course nearby. It was a challenging setup the bikers used for their own competitions, complete with tire jumps, narrow walkways, and various barriers. A smirk played across his face as he pointed toward it. "You think those dogs can handle that? Prove it!" The other bikers gathered closer, their previous laughter replaced by curious anticipation. Some whispered among themselves, placing informal bets on whether the older woman and her dogs would embarrass themselves. Rita simply nodded, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "Fine. I'll show you." Her words were quiet, but carried weight. She'd faced worse challenges in her military days, and this obstacle course was nothing compared to the training grounds she'd conquered with Max and Charlie. More people started gravitating toward the scene, drawn by the mounting tension. The regular rally attendees mixed with curious onlookers, forming a loose circle around the obstacle course. The air buzzed with anticipation. Joe's gang clustered together, their earlier mockery giving way to uncertain glances. Something about Rita's quiet confidence had shifted the dynamic. They'd expected her to back down, to walk away embarrassed. Instead, she stood there, composed and ready, with two perfectly disciplined military K9s at her command. Rita felt her heart beating steady and strong in her chest. She'd spent years training with Max and Charlie, building an unshakable bond through military service and countless missions. The jeers and doubts of these bikers meant nothing compared to what they'd already overcome together. As she began her final equipment check, adjusting Max and Charlie's gear with practiced efficiency, the crowd grew larger. The dogs remained focused, their eyes trained on Rita, waiting for her signal. They were more than just pets or service animals, they were her partners, her family, and they were about to show everyone exactly what that meant. Rita took her position at the starting line, her mind clearing of everything except the familiar presence of Max and Charlie at her sides. The midday sun beat down on the asphalt, but she barely noticed the heat. Years of training had taught her to focus only on what mattered right now. That was showing these bikers what real discipline looked like. "Ready to eat our dust, Grandma?" Joe called out, stretching his legs dramatically. His leather vest gleamed in the sunlight as he positioned himself next to her. Rita didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she gave Max and Charlie a gentle pat on their heads. A silent signal that it was time to work. Both dogs instantly shifted from their relaxed stance to alert attention, their eyes focused ahead on the obstacle course. The course wasn't anything special, just some old tires laid out in patterns, a few wooden ramps, and some rope barriers. But to Rita and her dogs, it might as well have been their old training ground. They'd run courses 10 times more difficult than this in the scorching desert heat. Someone in the crowd raised a whistle to their lips. The shrill sound pierced the air, and they were off. Rita moved with a grace that surprised the onlookers. Her steps were precise, measured, and quick. Max took the lead, clearing the first set of tires with powerful leaps, while Charlie stayed close to Rita's right side, matching her pace perfectly. The crowd fell silent, their earlier jeers dying in their throats as they watched the trio navigate the course. Max ducked under a low-hanging rope, his body flowing like water through the obstacle. Charlie darted through the tire maze, never missing a step, while Rita kept pace, her breathing steady and controlled. Joe's heavy boots pounded against the ground as he tried to keep up. His initial confidence was fading fast as he watched Rita and her dogs pull ahead. The synchronized movement between handler and dogs was unlike anything he'd ever seen. "Look at that!" someone in the crowd whispered loudly. "They're like one unit." Rita and her dogs approached a series of wooden ramps. Without any verbal command, Max took the high route while Charlie went low, both dogs executing their moves flawlessly. Rita herself navigated the middle path, her movements showing years of practiced precision. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, filled with amazement rather than mockery now. Phone cameras appeared in hands, recording the unexpected display of skill and teamwork. Joe's breathing grew labored as he struggled to maintain his pace. His earlier smirk had disappeared completely, replaced by a look of disbelief as Rita and her dogs extended their lead. The gap between them grew wider with each obstacle they cleared. "Those aren't just pets," someone in the crowd said. "Those are working dogs." Max and Charlie moved like extensions of Rita's will, anticipating her commands before she even gave them. When she shifted slightly left, they adjusted their positions accordingly. When she picked up speed, they matched her instantly. The three of them moved as one unit, their timing impeccable, their execution flawless. The crowd's initial silence had transformed into murmurs of admiration. The same people who had been laughing at Rita minutes ago were now watching in awe as she demonstrated exactly what a lifetime of training and dedication looked like. Joe's frustration became evident as he watched Rita and her dogs pull further ahead. His earlier confidence had evaporated in the face of their obvious skill and precision. The gap between them continued to widen, and the crowd's reaction told the story. They were witnessing something special, something they hadn't expected from the quiet woman with her two dogs. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the obstacle course as Rita moved with practiced grace, her movements fluid and purposeful. Max and Charlie flanked her sides, their eyes locked on her subtle hand signals, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. "Through," Rita commanded softly, pointing at the row of tires laid out before them. Max darted forward, his powerful body weaving through the obstacles with precision. His paws barely touched the ground as he navigated each tire, making it look as easy as a morning walk in the park. The crowd fell silent, their earlier jeers forgotten as they watched the display of skill and teamwork. Charlie, not to be outdone, approached the rope bridge with careful steps. Rita gave a quick hand signal, and the Labrador mix bounded across the suspended ropes with perfect balance, his tail held high with confidence. "Would you look at that?" someone whispered from the crowd. The voice held a note of awe that spread through the gathering like a ripple in still water. Rita stood tall, her earlier tension melting away as she worked with her beloved dogs. This was what they were trained for. This was what they lived for. She caught sight of Joe from the corner of her eye, his face a mixture of disbelief and growing respect as he struggled to keep pace. "Max, retrieve," Rita called out, pointing to a water bottle held by a woman in the front row. The German shepherd moved with purpose, approaching the spectator with gentle determination. His movements were careful and controlled as he took the bottle in his mouth, handling it with surprising delicacy before returning to Rita's side. A burst of spontaneous applause broke out. Even some of the tougher-looking bikers were nodding their heads, their earlier mockery forgotten in the face of such impressive skill. "Good boy," Rita praised, giving Max a quick pat. Charlie sat at attention, waiting for his turn to shine. With another hand signal, both dogs performed a synchronized weaving pattern through a series of poles, their movements perfectly coordinated. The obstacle course, which had seemed like a challenge meant to humiliate, had become their stage. Rita's commands were barely audible, just soft words and gentle gestures that her dogs responded to instantly. Years of training and trust showed in every movement they made together. Joe, meanwhile, was having a markedly different experience. The wall climb loomed before him, its height suddenly seeming more imposing than it had minutes ago. His leather jacket felt heavy and restrictive as he attempted to scale it, his boots scraping against the surface as he searched for purchase. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched Rita direct her dogs through yet another flawless maneuver. The confidence that had radiated from him earlier was rapidly dissolving, replaced by something that looked remarkably like humility. His earlier bravado seemed to shrink with each graceful movement of Rita and her canine partners. The crowd's attention had shifted entirely to Rita's performance. Even Joe's own friends were watching with undisguised admiration as Max and Charlie demonstrated their training. The dogs moved like extensions of Rita herself, reading her subtle cues and responding with immediate precision. That's something else," muttered one of the bikers who had been laughing earlier. Others nodded in agreement, their respect for the older woman and her dogs growing with each passing moment. Joe stumbled forward, his boots scraping against the hot pavement as he approached the final obstacle. His leather jacket was dark with sweat, and his breathing came in heavy gasps. The crowd that had been so enthusiastic about mocking Rita earlier now watched in awkward silence as their leader struggled to keep pace. Rita stood calmly at the final station, her posture straight despite the heat. Max and Charlie sat perfectly still beside her, their eyes alert and focused. There was no sign of strain on their faces, just the steady rhythm of their breathing and the occasional twitch of their ears as they awaited their next command. The contrast between them couldn't have been more striking. Where Joe was disheveled and worn, Rita and her dogs exhibited a composed grace that spoke of years of training and partnership. A few onlookers whispered among themselves, their earlier jeers replaced by murmurs of admiration. "Come on, Joe!" Someone called from the crowd, but the encouragement sounded hollow. Joe wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of dirt across his brow. His pride was clearly wounded, and his eyes darted between Rita and her dogs. The woman he'd dismissed as just another old-timer had thoroughly outperformed him, and the realization stung. "You're lucky your dogs are doing all the work for you," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly with the effort. The words echoed across the suddenly quiet rally grounds, falling flat in the heavy summer air. The crowd's energy shifted noticeably. Several bikers looked down at their boots, while others shook their heads. The excitement that had fueled their mockery earlier had evaporated like morning dew under the harsh sun. Rita stood her ground, her weathered hands resting lightly on Max and Charlie's leads. Her eyes met Joe's, and there was something in them that made him look away first. Not anger or triumph, but a quiet understanding that seemed to cut straight through his bravado. "It's not about me," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "It's about what we're willing to do for those who serve." Her words settled over the gathering like a heavy blanket. The distant rumble of motorcycles seemed to fade away, leaving only the weight of her statement hanging in the air. The crowd grew completely silent, processing the deeper meaning behind her simple response. Max and Charlie remained steadfast at her side, living proof of the property bond between handler and service dog, a testament to years of mutual trust and dedication. Their presence spoke volumes about service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of partnership. Lessons that went far beyond any obstacle course competition. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the obstacle course as Rita approached the final stretch. Her breathing was steady, controlled, years of military training kicking in even now. Max moved gracefully on her left, his powerful legs carrying him forward with purpose, while Charlie kept perfect pace on her right. Together, they formed a seamless unit, years of trust and training evident in every synchronized movement. "Come on, Max." "Charlie." "Steady," Rita called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Both dogs' ears perked up at her words, their steps never faltering. Behind them, Joe's labored breathing and heavy footfalls echoed across the course. The leather of his jacket creaked as he pushed himself harder, his face red with exertion and frustration. The crowd had grown larger now, forming a circle around the final section of the course. Rita's focus narrowed to the obstacles ahead. 3 hurdles followed by a challenging tire formation. She'd done this countless times during training, but now, with all eyes on her, each step carried extra weight. The first hurdle approached rapidly. "Up!" she commanded. Max and Charlie sailed over it in perfect unison, their bodies arcing gracefully through the air. Rita cleared it right behind them, her movements fluid despite her age. The second hurdle came quickly. Again, the trio moved as one, clearing it effortlessly. Sweat trickled down Rita's back, but her stance remained strong, her eyes fixed ahead. Behind them, Joe stumbled through the tire formation. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice strained. His foot caught on one of the tires, and he barely caught himself before falling. The watching bikers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes from their leader's struggle. Rita and her dogs approached the final set of obstacles. The tire formation loomed before them, a complex pattern that required precise timing and coordination. Charlie moved slightly ahead, finding his position, while Max adjusted his pace to match Rita's. "Ready?" Rita breathed. The dog's muscles tensed in anticipation. Now, they weaved through the tires with remarkable precision. Charlie ducked and twisted through the first section, his agility on full display. Max followed Rita's lead, matching her movements step for step. Their footwork was impeccable, each placement deliberate and sure. The crowd had fallen completely silent, their earlier mockery forgotten as they watched the display before them. Even those who had laughed the loudest now stood transfixed, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. Rita's heart pounded steadily as they emerged from the final tire. The finish line was just ahead, marked by 2 orange cones. She could hear Joe somewhere behind them, his frustrated grunts growing more distant. With a final burst of energy, Rita and her dogs crossed the finish line together. Max and Charlie immediately took up their positions on either side of her, their tails wagging with quiet pride. Neither dog panted heavily, their military training evident in their composed demeanor. Rita stood tall, her breathing controlled as she reached down to pat both dogs' heads. The late afternoon sun highlighted the silver in her hair, but there was nothing aged about her bearing. She took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and relief wash over her. The bikers stood in stunned silence. Joe finally emerged from the tire section, his previous bravado completely deflated. He stopped several yards short of the finish line, staring at Rita and her dogs with an unreadable expression. The only sound was the gentle whirring of Max and Charlie's tails against the ground as they sat perfectly positioned beside their handler, awaiting their next command. A sharp yelp pierced through the triumphant moment, making Rita's blood run cold. Max, her loyal German shepherd, suddenly pulled up short beside her, his right front paw hovering above the ground. The proud stance he'd maintained throughout the challenge crumpled as he tried to put weight on it. "Max?" Rita's voice was barely above a whisper as she watched her companion struggle. The crowd's cheering died down, replaced by uncertain murmurs and whispers. Charlie moved closer to his friend, nose twitching with concern. Joe, who had been catching his breath at the finish line, straightened up. A smirk spread across his face as he watched Max hobble. Well, he called out, his voice carrying across the now quiet gathering. "Looks like your dog can't even keep up now. Guess that's what happens when you push old dogs too hard." Rita barely registered his words. Her focus was entirely on Max, who was trying to maintain his dignified bearing, despite the obvious pain. She knelt beside him, her movements careful and deliberate. The years of working with military dogs had taught her to stay calm, even when her heart was racing with worry. "Easy, boy," she murmured, running her hands gently along his shoulder. Max's eyes, usually bright and alert, were clouded with discomfort. He whined softly as her fingers moved down his leg, seeking the source of his pain. Charlie stood guard nearby, his usual playful demeanor replaced by watchful concern. He kept close to Max, occasionally nudging him with his nose as if offering support. The crowd of bikers had drawn closer, forming a loose circle around them. Some wore expressions of genuine concern, while others, like Joe, maintained their dismissive attitudes. "Guess this shows what happens when you try to prove something you're not capable of anymore," Joe called out, though his voice held less conviction than before. Rita's trained hands found the spot that made Max flinch. The muscle felt tight, and there was slight swelling beginning to form. Years of experience told her this wasn't just a simple strain. Her stomach knotted as she realized the extent of the injury. "Charlie, come," she called softly, and her second dog immediately moved to her side. She needed both of them close now, Max for medical attention and Charlie for the steady support he always provided in difficult moments. The sun beat down on the pavement, making the air shimmer with heat. The motorcycle engines had all gone quiet, and the only sounds were the occasional whispers from the crowd and Max's labored breathing. Rita's fingers continued their gentle examination, each touch careful and precise, each reaction from Max telling her more about his condition. What had started as a moment of triumph had quickly transformed into something else entirely. The challenge that was meant to prove their capabilities had instead revealed their vulnerabilities. Rita felt the weight of every eye on her, but she remained focused on Max, her face composed despite the worry churning inside her. Her heart sank further as she completed her examination. The injury was worse than she'd initially feared, something that wouldn't heal with just a few days of rest. Charlie pressed against her leg, offering silent support as she processed this realization. The crowd remained hushed, watching as Rita tended to her injured companion, the previous excitement of the challenge forgotten in the gravity of the moment. Rita's steps were heavy as she guided Max toward her car, each limping movement from her beloved companion sending a wave of worry through her chest. The German Shepherd's usual graceful gait was replaced by an uneven hobble, his right front paw barely touching the ground. Charlie walked close to Max's other side, as if ready to steady his friend if needed. The crowd of bikers parted silently as she passed. Their earlier jeers and laughter had evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. Rita kept her chin up, refusing to let them see how much this hurt. Years of military service had taught her to maintain composure, even when her heart was breaking. Joe stood off to the side, his earlier bravado deflated. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, hands shoved deep in his leather jacket pockets. His eyes darted between Rita and Max, then down to the ground. The change in his demeanor was striking. Gone was the swaggering biker who'd mocked her just minutes ago. "Come on, boy," Rita murmured to Max, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She could feel the stares of the crowd boring into her back. Some faces showed pity, others discomfort, but none of them mattered right now. All that mattered was getting Max the help he needed. The late afternoon sun beat down on the parking lot as Rita approached her car. The heat shimmered off the pavement, making the air feel thick and heavy. Charlie stayed close, his usual playful nature subdued, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. His brown eyes were fixed on Max, watching his every movement with concern. Rita's fingers tightened around the leash as she reached for her car keys. The metal was hot from sitting in her pocket, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing through possibilities. Was it a sprain? Something worse? The nearest vet who understood working dogs was 30 minutes away. "Easy now," she whispered as she opened the back door. Max looked up at her with trust in his eyes, even as pain clouded his expression. It took all of Rita's strength to help him into the back seat without causing him more discomfort. She arranged a blanket around him, creating a makeshift cushion to keep him stable during the drive. Charlie waited patiently by her side, his tail low but steady. When she patted the seat next to Max, he hopped in carefully, positioning himself so he wouldn't jostle his injured companion. The sight of their unwavering bond brought a lump to Rita's throat. Standing beside her open car door, Rita took a deep breath. The rally continued behind her. She could hear the distant rumble of motorcycles and scattered conversations, but it felt like a world away now. She glanced at Charlie, who met her gaze with steady determination. His presence was comforting, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. With a heavy sigh, Rita looked at Max one more time. The proud working dog who had just shown such incredible skill was now curled up in her back seat, trying to hide his pain. It wasn't supposed to end like this. They had proved themselves, shown everyone what they were capable of, but at what cost? Rita's hands trembled slightly as she unclipped Max's harness in the dimly lit living room. The familiar routine felt different now, heavier somehow. Max let out a soft whine as she gently worked the straps free, his brown eyes watching her with complete trust despite his discomfort. "Easy there, boy," Rita whispered, her voice catching. "Let me take a look at that paw." Charlie settled nearby, his head resting on his paws as he watched them intently. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting the room in shades of amber and gold. Rita's fingers moved carefully over Max's leg, feeling for any signs of serious injury. The swelling was obvious now, and Max flinched when she touched a particularly tender spot. Rita sat back on her heels, her chest tight with worry. After years of working with military dogs, she'd seen her share of injuries, but this was different. This was Max, her partner, her protector, her friend. The thought that she'd pushed him too hard, that she'd let her pride get the better of her judgment, made her stomach churn. "I'm so sorry, Max," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. The German shepherd leaned into her touch, his tail thumping weakly against the floor. Even now, he was trying to comfort her. The house felt unusually quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of their breathing and the distant hum of traffic. Rita's mind kept replaying the events at the rally, the mocking laughter, the challenge, the race. She'd wanted to prove something, to show those bikers that age and appearance didn't define capability. But at what cost? Moving to the couch, Rita patted the cushion beside her. Max struggled to his feet, limping heavily as he made his way over. She helped him up, careful not to jostle his injured leg. Charlie followed, settling at her feet with a concerned whimper. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and pink, but Rita barely noticed the beauty. Her thoughts were consumed with worry about Max's injury. Would this affect his ability to work? Would he need extensive treatment? The questions swirled in her mind, each one heavier than the last. She ran her hand along Max's back, feeling the familiar pattern of his fur beneath her fingers. He'd been with her through so much, countless missions, difficult times, moments of triumph and defeat. Now, watching him hurt because of her choices made her feel like she'd failed him. Charlie pressed closer to her feet, offering silent support. Rita reached down to pat his head, grateful for his steady presence. The room grew darker as the sun continued its descent, but Rita remained still, lost in thought. The day's events weighed heavily on her shoulders, and the path forward seemed unclear. Max shifted beside her, laying his head in her lap with complete trust despite his pain. Rita felt tears prick at her eyes. Even injured, he was still trying to be there for her. She didn't deserve such loyalty, such unwavering faith. The last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, leaving Rita sitting in the growing darkness. She stayed there, one hand on Max's head, the other absently stroking Charlie's fur, watching the day slip away and feeling more lost than she had in years. The phone's shrill ring pierced through the quiet evening, making Rita jump slightly in her seat. Max lifted his head from where he lay on his cushion, ears perking up at the sudden noise. Charlie, ever vigilant, stayed at Rita's feet, but watched her intently. Rita reached for her phone on the coffee table, her movements slow and deliberate. When she saw the name on the screen, her breath caught in her throat. Joe. The same man who had mocked her at the rally was now calling her. Her finger hovered over the screen as she debated whether to answer or let it go to voicemail. After 3 rings, she pressed accept and held the phone to her ear. "Hello?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Rita?" Joe's voice crackled through the speaker. It sounded different now. Gone was the mocking tone from earlier, replaced by something softer, almost hesitant. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand." Rita remained silent, her free hand absently stroking Charlie's head. She could hear Joe clearing his throat on the other end of the line. "I've been thinking about it," he continued, "and I want to make things right." Rita glanced at Max, who was still watching her with those intelligent eyes. His injured paw was slightly raised, and the sight made her heart clench. "Why are you calling, Joe?" "Look, I was wrong. The way I acted, the things I said." He paused, and Rita could hear him take a deep breath. "I've got a friend who's a vet. A good one. I told him about Max, and he said he'd take a look, no charge." Rita's fingers tightened around the phone. The offer was unexpected, and she wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to refuse outright, pride and hurt still fresh from the day's events. "I know you probably don't trust me," Joe said, filling the silence. "Hell, I wouldn't trust me either after how I acted. But I'd like to meet tomorrow. Talk things through. Maybe we could figure out how to help Max together?" Rita looked around her living room, at the medals and certificates on her wall, at her two faithful companions who had never let her down, the same dogs these bikers had mocked just hours ago. "I appreciate the offer, Joe, but why should I trust you now?" "Because I was an idiot," he replied quickly. "Because what I saw today, it wasn't just about the dogs or the obstacle course. It was about respect, wasn't it? And I showed none." His words hung in the air as Rita considered her options. Charlie nudged her hand with his nose, as if sensing her internal struggle. "Will you meet me tomorrow?" Joe asked. "Just to talk. You can pick the place, the time, whatever makes you comfortable." Rita took a deep breath. "If we meet," she said firmly, "it'll be on my terms. No games, no showing off, no more mockery." "Absolutely," Joe agreed quickly. "Whatever you say." The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn leather booths. Rita sat with her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, watching the door. Her fingers tapped against the warm ceramic, betraying her nervousness about this meeting. The bell above the door jingled, and Joe stepped inside. He looked different without his leather jacket and away from his group of bikers. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and his usual swagger was nowhere to be seen. He spotted Rita and made his way over, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered from yesterday. The waitress came by with a coffee pot, and Joe nodded his thanks as she filled his cup. Rita watched him stir sugar into his coffee, noticing how he avoided meeting her eyes. "How's Max doing?" he asked finally, looking up. "He's resting at home. Charlie's keeping him company," Rita replied, her voice neutral. "The vet's seeing him this afternoon." Joe nodded, then set his spoon down with a soft clink. "Listen, Rita, I was way out of line yesterday. The things I said, the way I acted." He shook his head, running a hand through his graying hair. "I was showing off for the guys, trying to be the big man, but watching you and your dogs out there." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I've never seen anything like it. The way they moved, how they listened to you. It was incredible." Rita's expression softened slightly, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "I've been thinking about it all night," Joe went on, his coffee growing cold and untouched. "I made assumptions about you because of your age, because you're a woman. I thought I could get a few cheap laughs." He met her eyes directly now, his face flushed with shame. "I was wrong. Dead wrong." The morning crowd bustled around them, the clatter of plates and murmur of conversations creating a gentle backdrop to their conversation. Rita took a sip of her coffee, considering his words. "I want to make it right," Joe said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table between them. "This is for Max's vet bills. Whatever he needs, I'll cover it. It's the least I can do." Rita looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "That's generous of you, Joe," she said carefully. "It's not just about the money," he insisted, leaning forward slightly. "What you do with those dogs, the way you handle them, it's special. I've got friends, other vets, who could use someone like you in their corner. I was thinking maybe we could." Rita held up a hand, stopping him. "One thing at a time," she said gently. "I appreciate the offer to help with Max's treatment, but I need some time to think about it." Joe nodded quickly, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need. I just—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. I just want you to know how sorry I am, and that I'm going to do better. No more mocking. No more showing off at someone else's expense." Rita nodded, feeling the sincerity in his words. "I'll think about it, Joe. That's all I can promise right now." They finished their coffee. In a comfortable silence, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. When they finally stood to leave, there was a peace between them that hadn't existed before. A mutual understanding born from honest words and genuine remorse. The evening air was cool and crisp as Rita sat in her living room, gently massaging Max's injured paw. Charlie lay nearby, his watchful eyes never leaving his companion. The events of the day had left her mentally exhausted, and Joe's unexpected apology at the diner still weighed heavily on her mind. A sudden knock at the door startled her. Max's ears perked up, but he remained calm, sensing no threat. Charlie lifted his head, alert but relaxed. Rita wasn't expecting anyone this late, and her guard immediately went up. Years of military training had taught her to always be cautious. When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Mike, one of the quieter bikers from the rally. Unlike Joe's brash presence, Mike had a gentler demeanor. He stood there awkwardly, holding a small white envelope in his weathered hands. "I heard what happened," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darted to Max, who was visible through the doorway. "I wasn't part of the mockery, but I saw how you handled it." Rita's posture remained rigid, uncertain of his intentions. But there was something in his demeanor that seemed genuine, almost vulnerable. He shuffled his feet slightly, clearly uncomfortable but determined to say what he'd come to say. "I think what you're doing with your dogs is amazing," Mike continued, his voice gaining strength. "The way they moved, the connection you have with them. It's something special." Rita's expression softened slightly. She could hear the sincerity in his words, so different from the jeering she'd experienced earlier at the rally. Max had managed to limp to the door, positioning himself beside her, and Charlie wasn't far behind. Mike's eyes grew distant for a moment before he spoke again. "My niece. She's struggling after coming back from the war." His voice cracked slightly. "She's not the same person who left. Sometimes I catch her staring into space, jumping at loud noises. She won't talk to any of us about it." Rita felt a familiar ache in her chest. She knew that look, had seen it countless times in the eyes of returning veterans. The envelope in Mike's hand trembled slightly. "Maybe you could help her," he said, extending the envelope toward Rita. "I've seen how your dogs work, the way they respond to commands, how they stay focused even when everything else is chaos. Maybe that's what she needs." Rita looked at the envelope, then back at Mike's hopeful expression. The weight of his request hung in the air between them. She knew exactly what he was asking. Not just for help, but for hope. For something to bring his niece back from wherever the war had taken her. Standing there in her doorway, Rita felt the familiar pull of duty, the desire to help another veteran in need. But Max's injury was a stark reminder of her own limitations. The day's events had shaken her confidence more than she cared to admit. She thanked Mike for the gesture, her voice gentle but non-committal. She needed time, time to heal Max, time to process everything that had happened, and most importantly, time to decide if she was ready to take on the responsibility of helping another person in need. The gentle hum of the air conditioning fills Rita's living room as she sits beside Max's bed, her weathered hands softly stroking his fur. The German shepherd's breathing is steady now, unlike the labored pants from a few days ago. Charlie lies nearby, his watchful eyes never leaving his companion. The vet visit had been a blur of worry and relief. Dr. Thompson had diagnosed a moderate sprain, nothing permanent, but enough to require rest and careful monitoring. "He'll need time," the vet had said, "but he's strong. He'll recover fully." Rita adjusts the small ice pack on Max's paw, earning a grateful look from her faithful companion. The swelling has gone down considerably, but she can't help feeling responsible for pushing him too hard that day at the rally. Max whimpers softly and shifts his position, seeking comfort in Rita's touch. "I know, boy," she whispers, scratching behind his ears. "We'll get through this together." The past few days have been a whirlwind of emotions. Joe's unexpected apology keeps playing in her mind, the way his usual bravado had crumbled into genuine remorse. She remembers how different he looked in that diner, shoulders slumped, pride set aside. His offer to help with Max's medical bills still surprises her. Then there's Mike's visit, his quiet sincerity when he spoke about his niece. Rita glances at the envelope he left, still unopened on her coffee table. The thought of helping another veteran, especially one struggling to adjust, stirs something deep within her. It's what she's always done. After all, helping others heal through the bond with service dogs. Max's tail thumps against his bed as Rita reaches for his water bowl. Even injured, he maintains his loving, attentive nature. She fills the bowl with fresh water, remembering how he performed flawlessly at the rally before the injury. His dedication never wavers, whether in training or in recovery. Charlie pads over, gently nuzzling Max before settling down next to him. Rita watches their interaction, touched by their unwavering bond. These dogs have been more than just partners. They've been her family, her support system through countless challenges. The afternoon sun filters through her curtains, casting warm patterns across the floor. Rita leans back in her chair, feeling the weight of decisions pressing on her shoulders. Mike's niece needs help, but is she ready to take on that responsibility while Max recovers? Can she find a way to balance both? Max shifts again, rolling slightly to press his head against Rita's leg. His dark eyes meet hers, full of trust and affection. She remembers all the times they've faced challenges together. Training sessions, difficult missions, countless hours of working with veterans. Each time, they emerged stronger. The quiet of the room is comforting as Rita continues her gentle ministrations, checking Max's bandage and adjusting his position. His recovery is steady, each day bringing small improvements. The vet's words echo in her mind, "Take it one day at a time." Looking at Max, peaceful despite his injury, Rita feels her racing thoughts begin to settle. The mockery at the rally seems distant now, overshadowed by the unexpected kindness that followed. Joe's transformation from antagonist to ally, Mike's gentle request for help, perhaps these are signs pointing toward something new. Max sighs contentedly, his eyes drifting closed as Rita continues her careful watch. In this moment of quiet companionship, surrounded by her loyal dogs, Rita feels her anxiety about the future begin to fade. The path ahead may be uncertain, but she realizes she doesn't have to figure it all out right now. The morning sun streamed through the cafe windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden table where Rita sat with Joe and Mike. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air as they huddled over their steaming mugs. Rita's hands wrapped around her cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I've been talking to some of the guys," Joe said, his voice softer than that day at the rally. He pulled out a small notebook from his leather jacket. "There are at least 6 veterans in our circle who could use help with their service dogs." Mike nodded, adding, "And my niece Sarah, she's struggling to train her new companion. She needs someone who understands both sides, the military experience and the dogs." Rita watched as Max settled comfortably at her feet, his injury nearly healed. Charlie lay alert beside him, both dogs content in the quiet cafe corner. The past week had given her time to think, to process everything that had happened since the rally. "We could start small," Rita suggested, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe meet twice a week at first. I know a place. The community center has space we could use." Joe's face lit up. "I can help with getting the word out. The riding community, they respect what you did at the rally. Plus," he paused, looking slightly embarrassed, I owe you for being such a jerk that day. We all do, Mike chimed in. But this isn't about making amends anymore. This is about doing something that matters. Rita felt something shift inside her, a spark of purpose that had been dimming lately blazed back to life. She pulled out her own notebook and started jotting down ideas. We'll need some basic equipment. Training leads, rewards for the dogs. Leave that to us. Joe interrupted, sitting up straighter. The club can handle the supplies. We've got connections all over town. Mike leaned forward, his usually quiet demeanor animated with enthusiasm. And I can build some simple obstacles. Nothing too challenging at first. My workshop has everything we need. Rita looked at both men, these unlikely allies who had transformed from adversaries to partners in just a matter of days. The contrast between their first meeting and now struck her, how life could change so quickly, turning mockery into meaningful connection. "All right," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Let's do this, but we do it right. These veterans deserve our best." Joe reached across the table, extending his hand. "You've got my word, Rita. We're in this together." Mike's hand joined theirs. "For the veterans and their four-legged partners." They shook hands, the gesture simple but loaded with promise. Rita felt the weight of doubt that had been pressing on her shoulders begin to lift. She looked down at Max and Charlie, both dogs watching her with steady eyes, and knew she'd made the right choice. The handshake ended, and Rita sat back, feeling lighter than she had since Max's injury. Where there had been uncertainty, now there was purpose. Where there had been isolation, now there was community. The path ahead seemed clearer than it had in days. Rita sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and a laptop displaying spreadsheets. Max lounged nearby on his bed, his injury healing nicely, while Charlie rested his head on her lap. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on their planning session. Joe and Mike sat across from her, their leather jackets draped over their chairs. The contrast between their tough appearance and their earnest expressions made Rita smile. They'd been working for hours, making calls and organizing details for their upcoming fundraiser. "The hardware store just called back," Mike said, putting down his phone. "They're donating supplies for the obstacle course demonstration." His eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "And my brother's construction company is lending us the tables and chairs." Rita nodded, adding the information to her growing list. "That's wonderful." "And the local pet store promised to provide treats and supplies for all the service dogs who attend." She glanced at Max and Charlie, who perked up at the word treats. Joe leaned forward, his usual gruffness replaced with genuine excitement. "I've got 15 riders from my group committed to helping with parking and security." He paused, scratching his chin. "Never thought I'd be organizing something like this, but it feels right, you know." Rita understood completely. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from a veteran interested in attending. The support from the community had been overwhelming. Local businesses were eager to help, and word was spreading fast through veteran groups and social media. "We've got 3 professional dog trainers volunteering their time," Rita said, checking her notes. "They'll be doing demonstrations throughout the day." She reached down to pat Charlie's head. "And Max and Charlie will do a special presentation showing everyone what these amazing animals can do." Mike pulled out his phone, showing them a message. "My niece Sarah? The one who just got back from overseas? She's coming. Says she's interested in getting a service dog." His voice softened. "She hasn't been this excited about anything in months." Rita felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was exactly why they were doing this, to help veterans like Sarah find hope and healing through the bond with service dogs. She remembered her own journey with Max and Charlie, how they'd helped her transition back to civilian life. The phone rang again. This time it was the local newspaper, wanting to do a story about the fundraiser. Joe answered it, his voice proud as he explained their mission. Rita watched him, marveling at how far they'd come from that first confrontation at the rally. "We should set up a station where veterans can meet potential service dogs," Rita suggested, making another note. "The rescue organization I work with has several dogs with the right temperament for training." Charlie nudged her hand, and she realized she'd stopped petting him. "Yes, you'll be there too, showing everyone how it's done," she told him softly. The planning continued through the morning, their excitement growing with each detail they finalized. 2 food trucks had agreed to donate a portion of their sales. A local band would provide music. The park department had given them permission to use the main pavilion. Rita looked around at her unlikely partners, a former adversary and his quiet friend, now working alongside her to make a difference. Max and Charlie watched contentedly as the humans worked, occasionally offering a supportive woof when the energy in the room rose. The fundraiser was taking shape, becoming more real with each passing moment. In just 2 weeks, they would transform their vision into reality. Rita's hands trembled slightly as she made another note, but it wasn't from nervousness. It was from pure anticipation. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the park as Rita stood at the entrance, her heart beating a steady rhythm against her chest. Max and Charlie sat obediently at her sides, their tails wagging as they watched the first cars pull into the parking lot. The sight of Joe and Mike setting up tables under the shade of oak trees brought a small smile to her face. "Hey, Rita," Joe called out, waving as he struggled with a banner that read, "Veterans and K9s Unite." "Could use your expertise over here." Rita made her way over, carefully guiding Max and Charlie through the growing crowd. Max's injury had healed well, and he moved with his old confidence again. As she helped secure the banner, she caught sight of Mike arranging donation boxes on a nearby table. "Never thought I'd see the day," Mike said with a gentle laugh. "Us working together like this?" People began trickling in steadily now. Some carried plates of homemade cookies and brownies, while others brought chairs and blankets to sit on the grass. Rita noticed several veterans among them, some with their own service dogs, and her chest tightened with emotion. A young woman approached, leading a German shepherd that looked remarkably like Max. "Are you Rita?" she asked hesitantly. "I'm Sarah, Mike's niece." The dog at her side stood alert but calm, watching Rita with intelligent eyes. "Welcome," Rita said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm so glad you could make it." More people arrived, filling the park with chatter and laughter. Joe had set up a demonstration area where Rita would later show some basic training techniques. The smell of coffee and pastries wafted from a local vendor's booth, who had agreed to donate a portion of their sales to the cause. Rita walked through the growing crowd, stopping to chat with veterans and their families. She listened to their stories, shared some of her own experiences, and felt a deep connection with each person she met. Max and Charlie drew attention wherever they went, their professional demeanor and gentle nature winning hearts. "This is more than I expected," Joe admitted, appearing at her side with a cup of coffee. "Look at all these people who came to support us." Rita nodded, watching as a little girl tentatively patted Charlie's head under her watchful eye. The morning air was filled with possibility and hope. She saw Mike introducing his niece to other veterans, watched as they shared experiences and found common ground. A local news reporter arrived, camera in hand, asking to interview Rita about the initiative. As she spoke about their mission to support veterans and their service animals, she felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just about proving something anymore, it was about building something meaningful. The first donations started coming in, steady and generous. People lined up at the registration table, eager to contribute to the cause. Rita caught sight of familiar faces from the biker rally, now wearing supportive smiles instead of mocking grins. "We've already received enough to cover Max's vet bills twice over," Mike announced, checking the donation box. "And it's just the beginning." Rita stood in the middle of it all, taking in the scene before her. The park had transformed into a gathering of hope and support, filled with people who believed in their cause. As she watched Max and Charlie interact with other service dogs and their handlers, she couldn't help but smile. This was exactly where she needed to be. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park as more people filtered into the fundraiser. Rita stood near her information booth, watching as veterans with their service dogs approached. Each one had a story, and she could see it in their eyes, that familiar look of someone who'd been through difficult times but found strength in their four-legged companions. "Ma'am?" A young veteran with a Belgian Malinois at his side stepped forward. "I heard about what happened at the rally. What you did. It means a lot to us." Rita smiled warmly, reaching down to pet his dog. "What's this beautiful one's name?" "Shadow," he replied, his voice softening. "She helped me through some rough patches after I came home." He paused, then added, "I never thought I'd see bikers and veterans coming together like this." As if on cue, Joe appeared with a stack of chairs. "Need any help setting up over here?" he asked, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine warmth. Behind him, other bikers were helping to arrange tables and put up banners. Rita watched as Max, now fully recovered, wagged his tail at the sight of Shadow. Charlie sat alertly by her side, taking in the growing crowd. The transformation from that day at the rally to now seemed almost surreal. A woman in her 30s approached, tears in her eyes. "I read about your story in the local paper," she said, holding out an envelope. "My father was a veteran, and his service dog saved his life more times than I can count. This is for your cause." Rita accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Throughout the afternoon, more stories emerged. A retired Marine spoke about how his German Shepherd helped him cope with PTSD. An Army nurse shared how her service dog detected her anxiety attacks before they happened. Mike appeared with his niece, Jessica, who had been hesitant to attend. Her own service dog, a gentle lab named Bear, stayed close to her side. "Thank you for doing this," she whispered to Rita. "It helps to know we're not alone." The bikers, once a source of mockery, now stood as guardians of the event. They directed traffic, helped set up equipment, and shared their own stories of family members who had served. Joe had organized a motorcycle display, with donations going directly to the cause. Rita's table began to fill with envelopes, checks, and promises of support. Local businesses pledged monthly contributions, and several veterans offered to volunteer their time for future events. The initial goal they'd set seemed modest now, as the community's generosity surpassed their expectations. Looking around, Rita saw more than just donations. She saw healing. Veterans who had arrived looking tense now laughed with others who understood their experiences. Service dogs played together in a designated area, their handlers sharing training tips and resources. "We did it," Joe said, coming to stand beside her. "Though really, you did it. You showed us all what real strength looks like." Charlie pressed against Rita's leg, and Max sat proudly at her other side. The afternoon light caught the donations piled on her table, but it was the sight of people connecting, sharing, and supporting each other that filled her heart with the deepest satisfaction. A sense of accomplishment washed over her as she watched the scene before her. Bikers and veterans, service dogs and their handlers, all brought together by a moment that had started with mockery but transformed into something beautiful. The community had come together in a way she never imagined possible, and she knew this was just the beginning. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park as Rita watched the steady stream of people moving between the tables and displays. Max and Charlie sat contentedly at her feet, their tails wagging occasionally as children stopped to pet them. The fundraiser had exceeded all her expectations, and the turnout was better than she could have hoped for. Joe and Mike approached her table, their faces bright with excitement. The transformation in Joe was remarkable. Gone was the mocking bravado, replaced by genuine enthusiasm. "Rita," Joe said, pulling up a chair beside her, "we've been talking to some of the other chapters." He leaned forward, his voice eager. "They want to get involved, too." "We could make this bigger than just our town." Mike nodded, his quiet presence reassuring. "There's a chapter in Bristol that works with veterans already. They heard about what we're doing here and want to connect." Rita's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't imagined their small initiative could spread so quickly. "Really? That's that's amazing. And that's not all," Joe continued, spreading out a roughly sketched map on the table. "We've got contacts in at least 5 other cities. Each one could host events like this." His finger traced lines between the points. "We could create a network, help more veterans find the support they need." Rita studied the map, her mind racing with possibilities. This was so much more than she'd initially envisioned. "But how would we manage something that big?" Mike pulled out his phone, showing her a simple website he'd started building. "We can coordinate online, share resources, maybe even help match veterans with service dogs in different areas." A young veteran approached their table, his service dog at his side. "Excuse me," he said, "but I couldn't help overhearing. I work in web development, and I'd love to help with the website." Rita smiled warmly. "Please, join us." She gestured to an empty chair, and the young man sat down. As they discussed ideas, more people gathered around. A retired veterinarian offered to provide discounted services for service dogs. A local business owner proposed hosting monthly meetups. The energy was infectious, and Rita felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she watched these strangers come together, united by a common purpose. Joe caught her eye and grinned. "See what you started? All because you wouldn't back down when we were being jerks." Rita shook her head, remembering that day at the rally. "I think it's what we all started together." The conversation flowed freely as they discussed logistics, schedules, and possibilities. Someone suggested creating training programs for new handlers. Another person mentioned setting up a support hotline for veterans struggling with their service dogs. Max shifted at Rita's feet, pressing against her leg, and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. His injury had healed well, and watching him now, no one would guess he'd been hurt. Like Rita herself, he'd grown stronger through adversity. As the afternoon wore on, Rita found herself at the center of an impromptu planning committee. The mockery she'd faced at the rally seemed like a lifetime ago. Now, surrounded by people eager to help, to contribute, to be part of something bigger than themselves, she felt a profound sense of purpose. She looked around at the gathered crowd, veterans, bikers, community members, all working together. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. What had started as a simple fundraiser was transforming into something much more significant. A movement, a community, a chance to make real change. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Rita sat at her desk, sorting through a stack of letters. Max and Charlie dozed nearby, their peaceful breathing a gentle soundtrack to her morning ritual. The past few months had transformed her small initiative into something she never expected. She picked up one letter, her fingers tracing the slightly crumpled edges. "Dear Rita," it began, "I didn't think anyone would understand what it was like coming home. My service dog, Bear, has changed everything, thanks to your training program." Rita's eyes moistened as she continued reading the soldier's story of recovery and hope. Another envelope contained photos, a young veteran smiling with his German shepherd at graduation, both looking proud and confident. The image brought back memories of that day at the rally, when mockery had turned into something meaningful. Joe knocked on her office door, poking his head in. "Ready for the big day?" He wasn't wearing his usual leather jacket, but rather a neat polo shirt with their organization's logo, a silhouette of a fall handler and service dog. "Almost," Rita replied, gathering the letters into a neat pile. "Hard to believe how far we've come. From that obstacle course to this?" Joe chuckled, but his eyes were warm with respect. "You proved us all wrong that day, Rita. And look what it started." Mike appeared behind Joe, clipboard in hand. "The venue's already filling up. We've got twice as many people as last time." He grinned. "And wait till you see how many veterans brought their dogs." Rita stood, smoothing her jacket. The same one she'd worn at the rally, but now it bore their organization's patch. Second Chance K9, where heroes help heroes. Max and Charlie perked up, sensing it was time to go. At the venue, a converted warehouse space, Rita paused at the entrance. The interior buzzed with activity. Veterans with their service dogs moved through training stations. Families chatted with handlers, asking questions and sharing stories. Even some of the once skeptical bikers were there, helping with logistics and offering support. A young woman approached Rita, tears in her eyes. "My brother," she said softly. "He came back different, but after working with your program." She gestured to where a man sat calmly with a chocolate lab, engaged in conversation with others. "It's like having him back again." Rita squeezed the woman's hand, understanding flowing between them without words. More people gathered around, each with their own story of transformation. A mother whose daughter found purpose in training service dogs. A veteran who rediscovered hope through the unconditional love of his canine partner. Mike appeared at Rita's side. "It's time," he said gently. Rita nodded, taking a deep breath. Max and Charlie flanked her as she made her way to the front of the room. The crowd quieted. Faces turned expectantly toward her. She saw Joe in the back, giving her a thumbs up. Around the room, handlers stood with their dogs, all connected by an invisible thread of understanding and support. The microphone felt warm in her hand as she surveyed the gathered crowd. This wasn't just a training program anymore. It was a community, a family forged from shared experiences and mutual respect. Rita felt the weight of their trust, their hope, and their gratitude. She wasn't just the woman who'd been mocked at a rally anymore. She was their guide, their mentor, their friend. The morning sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Rita watched another truck pull in. Two more veterans, each with service dogs at their side, stepped out and waved. She recognized them from last month's event. Their smiles were warmer now, more confident. "Morning, Rita," Joe's voice boomed from behind her. He was carrying a stack of folding chairs, his leather vest catching the early light. "Mike's bringing the tables. We've got twice as many people signed up this time." Rita nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Just 6 months ago, these same men had stood in a crowd of mockery. Now, they were here every weekend, helping set up, sharing stories, and supporting others who needed it most. Inside the center, volunteers bustled about, setting up information booths and training areas. Photos from previous events lined the walls, snapshots of veterans with their dogs, smiling faces, and healing hearts. Rita paused at one particular image. Max and Charlie demonstrating training techniques to a group of wide-eyed onlookers. "Remember when we thought this was just going to be a small support group?" Mike asked, joining her at the wall. He set down a box of pamphlets and grinned. "Now look at us. 3 events a month, partnerships with 4 different veterans organizations, and a waiting list for your training programs." Rita watched as more people filtered in. Some wore military badges, others came in civilian clothes, but all of them carried the same look of purpose in their eyes. The bikers, once a source of ridicule, now formed a protective circle around the community they'd helped build. Joe's voice carried across the room as he shared Rita's story with a newcomer. "You should have seen her that day," he said, shaking his head. "We were all acting like fools, but she stood her ground, showed us what real strength looks like." Charlie padded over to Rita's side, pressing against her leg. Max, fully recovered and stronger than ever, followed close behind. Rita reached down to scratch behind their ears, remembering the day everything changed. The mockery, the race, Max's injury. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. A young woman approached, her service dog still learning to navigate crowds. Rita recognized the uncertainty in her eyes, the same look she'd seen in countless others who'd come seeking help. "Miss Lawson?" the woman asked hesitantly. "I heard your story from my Uncle Mike. He said you could help me understand. Help me work with my dog better." Rita smiled warmly, gesturing for the woman to join her. As they walked toward the training area, she could hear the familiar rumble of motorcycles outside, more of the biker community arriving to support the day's events. What had started as a moment of humiliation had transformed into something extraordinary. The bikers who once laughed now stood as guardians of her mission. Veterans who arrived broken found healing through their connection with their dogs. Each success story, each small victory, added another thread to the tapestry of hope they were weaving together. Joe and Mike moved through the crowd, greeting newcomers, sharing stories, and ensuring everyone felt welcome. They had become more than supporters. They were family. Rita watched as they guided people to different stations, their leather vests now proudly displaying patches that read, "Veterans and K9s Support Team." The community center hummed with activity, the sound of healing, of growth, eyes of connections being forged. Rita felt tears prick at her eyes as she surveyed the room. This wasn't just a program anymore. It wasn't just about training dogs or helping veterans. It was about building bridges, healing hearts, and creating a place where everyone belonged. Rita sat in her office, surrounded by photos of veterans and their service dogs. Each image told a story of transformation, of lives changed through the power of companionship and understanding. Max and Charlie dozed peacefully in the corner, their presence a constant reminder of where this journey had begun. The phone rang, and Rita smiled as she recognized the number, another veterans organization reaching out. These calls had become regular occurrences lately. What had started as a small local initiative had blossomed into something far greater than she'd ever imagined. "Mrs. Lawson," the caller began, "we've heard remarkable things about your program. Would you consider being our keynote speaker at the National Veterans Service Dog Conference next month?" Rita's heart swelled with pride as she accepted the invitation. After hanging up, she glanced at her calendar, already filled with speaking engagements and training sessions. Joe and Mike had been instrumental in spreading the word, their motorcycle group now serving as ambassadors for the cause. The following week, Rita stood before a crowd of eager faces at a regional veterans center. "When I started this journey," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I never imagined we'd reach so many people. But here we are. Proof that sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our greatest opportunities." She watched as heads nodded in agreement. In the audience, she spotted familiar faces, veterans she'd worked with, their loyal companions by their sides. There was Tom, a former Marine who'd struggled with PTSD until meeting his service dog, Bear, and Sarah, whose German Shepherd, Duke, had given her the confidence to rejoin civilian life. Joe and Mike sat in the back, beaming with pride. They'd come so far from that first confrontation at the rally. Now, they were her strongest advocates, helping coordinate events and reaching out to veteran communities across the state. "Our program isn't just about matching veterans with dogs," Rita continued, gesturing to Max and Charlie, who sat attentively beside her. "It's about building a community where everyone understands that it's okay to need help, and it's beautiful to offer it." The applause was thunderous, but what moved Rita most were the quiet conversations afterward. Veterans approached her, sharing their stories, their struggles, and their hopes. Each interaction reinforced what she'd known all along, that this work was bigger than her, bigger than any single person or organization. As she prepared for the national conference, Rita received news that left her momentarily speechless. The Department of Veterans Affairs had chosen her program as a model for similar initiatives across the country. They wanted to implement her training methods and community-building strategies nationwide. The morning of the awards ceremony arrived bright and clear. Rita stood backstage, adjusting her jacket, remembering that hot day at the rally when everything had changed. Max and Charlie waited patiently beside her, their presence as reassuring as ever. The announcer's voice filled the auditorium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this year's recipient of the Distinguished Service to Veterans Award, Rita Lawson." As Rita stepped onto the stage, she was met with a standing ovation. The spotlight illuminated faces in the crowd, hundreds of veterans, service dogs, and supporters, all connected through this shared mission. Joe and Mike stood near the front, grinning broadly. Behind them, rows of service dogs sat at attention, a testament to the program's success. The award gleamed in the stage lights as it was presented to her. Rita held it carefully, overwhelmed by the moment. Max and Charlie sat proudly at her feet, their tails wagging gently. This wasn't just her victory. It belonged to every person and every dog who had been part of this remarkable journey. Rita stood at the edge of the crowded community center, her hands clasped together as she watched the bustling scene before her. Max and Charlie sat quietly at her feet, their gray muzzles a testament to the years that had passed. The room hummed with energy as volunteers moved purposefully between stations, helping veterans connect with potential service dogs. "Would you look at that?" Joe appeared beside her, his leather vest now adorned with patches supporting veteran causes. Who would have thought that one day at the rally would lead to all this? Rita smiled, watching as Sarah, one of their newest program leaders, guided a young veteran through the basics of K9 handling. The young woman's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with determination as she worked with a German Shepherd puppy. "They don't need me anymore," Rita said softly, pride warming her voice. "They're ready." Mike joined them, carrying a stack of training manuals. "Ready or not, you'll always be the heart of this program, Rita. But you deserve this retirement. You've earned it." Rita watched as another volunteer, Tom, demonstrated advanced commands to a group of veterans. His movements were precise, just as she had taught him. The sight brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "Remember when you thought you were too old to make a difference?" Joe chuckled, shaking his head. "Look at what you've built." 5 chapters across the state, hundreds of veterans helped, dozens of dogs trained and placed. Rita nodded, her throat tight with emotion. The program had grown beyond her wildest dreams. What started as a small group meeting in a park had blossomed into a full-fledged organization. They had proper funding now, dedicated facilities, and a waiting list of veterans eager to join. Sarah approached them, clipboard in hand. "The new training schedule is set for next month," she reported confidently. "We've got 15 new veterans signed up, and the volunteer roster is full." "You've got this," Rita assured her, placing a gentle hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "Trust your instincts." Rita moved through the room one last time, saying goodbye to the people who had become family. Each face held a story. Each handshake carried years of shared experiences. Some of the veterans hugged her, whispering thanks for how she'd changed their lives. Near the door, she paused to watch a demonstration. A young veteran with prosthetic legs worked confidently with his service dog, showing newcomers what was possible. His smile was bright, his movements sure. 3 years ago, he'd barely been able to leave his house. Now he was teaching others. "It's time," Rita whispered to Max and Charlie. The dogs stood, their tails wagging gently. They'd aged alongside her, faithful companions through every step of this journey. Joe and Mike flanked her as she walked toward the exit. The sound of happy chatter, barking dogs, and laughter followed her. The program would continue without her, see that had always been the goal. She'd built something lasting, something that would help veterans long after she was gone. "You know," Mike said, holding the door open for her, "you might be retiring, but you'll always be our commander." Rita patted both Max and Charlie's heads, her heart full. The late afternoon sun warmed her face as she stepped outside. Behind her, the sounds of hope and healing continued, a symphony she had helped compose, but would now leave for others to conduct. She took one last look at the building, at the sign that read Veterans K9 Support Network, and smiled. Her legacy wasn't just in the program she'd built or the lives she'd touched. It was in the ripples that would continue long after today, in every veteran who found hope through the love of a service dog. Rita sat in her favorite armchair, sunlight streaming through the window as she opened the latest email from Joe. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but her eyes lit up as she read about the program's continued success. The Veteran Support Network she'd helped create had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. "Look at this, boys," she said softly to Max and Charlie, who lay nearby on their cushions. Both dogs were older now, their muzzles grayed, but their eyes remained bright and alert whenever Rita spoke. "They've just opened 3 new chapters in different states." The email detailed how the organization had helped hundreds of veterans find their way back to civilian life through the companionship of service dogs. Rita's chest swelled with pride as she read about Mike's niece, who now ran one of the largest chapters in the country. She set her tablet aside and reached down to scratch behind Max's ears. His tail thumped against the floor, the same loving response she'd grown accustomed to over their years together. Charlie scooted closer, not wanting to miss out on the attention. Through the window, Rita could see the garden she'd planted when she first stepped back from active involvement in the program. The flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, much like the hope that had blossomed from that difficult day at the rally years ago. A notification pinged on her phone, a video message from Joe. She pressed play, and his familiar face appeared on screen, now with more silver in his beard than black. "Rita, you won't believe this," he began, his voice full of excitement. "Remember that young Marine who came to us last month? The one who couldn't leave his house? Well, he just completed his first public outing with his new service dog." Rita felt tears welling up in her eyes as Joe shared more details. The Marine's story reminded her of her own journey, the struggles, the moments of doubt, and the ultimate triumph of spirit. She remembered the mockery at the rally, how it had nearly broken her resolve. But now, those same bikers who had once laughed at her were among the program's most dedicated volunteers. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her living room as she stood up slowly, her joints protesting slightly. Max and Charlie rose with her, their movements also showing signs of age but their devotion unchanged. Together, they made their way to the back porch, where 3 comfortable chairs waited, one for her, and 2 specially adapted for her loyal companions. Rita lowered herself into her chair, watching as Max and Charlie settled into theirs. The garden stretched before them, a peaceful sanctuary where countless veterans had found healing over the years. Some days, she still mentored those who needed extra guidance, sharing her experience and wisdom from this very spot. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Rita reached out, placing one hand on Max's head and the other on Charlie's. Their presence had been constant through everything. The challenges, the victories, and all the quiet moments in between. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and Rita closed her eyes, taking it all in. She thought about all the lives touched, all the veterans who had found their way back to hope, all the service dogs who had become lifelines to their handlers. What had started as a response to cruelty had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. Max let out a contented sigh beside her, and Charlie's tail wagged slowly. Together, they watched the sun sink lower on the horizon. The world had indeed changed, and Rita knew in her heart that she had played her part in making it better.